Welcome to Disturbing Books for Disturbed Readers, your new favorite way to find the most twisted, depraved, and gruesome reads. Each episode features a to-the-point, spoiler-free review of one of my top picks. If you find that we have similar tastes, then come along. Let's find a new story
to give you nightmares.
Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm talking about one of my new favorite books from my newest favorite author. We're talking the upcoming second novel from C.J. Leede, American Rapture. C.J. Leede is the author of Maeve Fly, if you're not sure why that name sounds familiar. If you haven't read Maeve Fly, I would highly recommend it. One of my favorite books. You can check out my previous episode on that. This one is a lot different. It's very different, actually. But it certainly lived up to the high expectations that I had set for it on my own. This one has a short and sweet synopsis, so I'll just read it to you verbatim. A virus is spreading across America, transforming the infected and making them feral with lust. Sophie, a good Catholic girl, must traverse the hellscape of the Midwest to try to find her family while the world around her burns. Along the way, she discovers there are far worse fates than dying a virgin. Now, I will say, almost every aspect of this book is undersold in this description. The infected are feral with lust. I would describe them more as rape zombies. Sophie, a good Catholic girl. The first few chapters dive into why that's a bit of an understatement. She essentially grows up in an abusive, almost cult-like sect of Catholicism. Even the other church members do not close themselves off from the rest of the world the way that her family does. So it's not just a good Catholic girl. And that's what a lot of the early book dives into. And frankly, even before everything hit the fan with the apocalypse, because this starts just before it, I would have been perfectly happy with an entire book about just the beginning. That actually reminds me of The Eyes Are the Best Part. I said the same thing about that one. The family drama was so well done that I didn't frankly need the horror. Trust me, I was glad to know it was coming, but you're not just going to be reading the first few chapters and wanting to blow through them because you're bored. Well, you might. I didn't. To me, this was a page turner through and through. There was a slowdown about 3/4 of the way in, but other than that, I really had a hard time putting it down. And really, I don't think a page was wasted other than maybe in that bit of a slowdown. And this book is almost 400 pages. So for me, that's quite long. I really prefer the 200, 250 range. So for me, this was a long one. So for it to not get boring or dull pretty much the whole time, I think that's quite a testament. Some books just need to be longer. Some stories need more pages to be told. Some of them don't. And those are the ones I struggle with. So this one very much deserved its page count, I think. This is obviously, from the brief synopsis and my additional details about it, going to be very heavy. This is obviously very dark. This is not for my first horror book. This isn't for new horror fans, most likely. But this isn't a particularly gory book. This isn't your extreme horror, shocking multiple page descriptions about people being cut apart and just trying to make you feel sick. It's not that at all. I did feel sick sometimes, but this more gets under your skin and bothers you about what's happening. Instead of being directly graphic, it's just incredibly dark and disturbing. Just the things that happen. It's not so much how they happen or how gruesome they are, but just that the things are happening at all. Really, this is probably a good pick for people who want to get into a bit darker horror, stuff that's a bit more outside of the mainstream, but they aren't ready for piles and piles of gore, or they just, that's not what they like anyway. This is at its core an apocalyptic coming-of-age story. I'm not particularly opinionated about coming-of-age stories. Some people kind of seek those out. I don't really care, but this was a really good one. And frankly, the apocalyptic setting, man, you could tell me any kind of story in this setting and in the way that she did it. I love not post-apocalyptic, but pre and mid-apocalyptic stories. Like I said, this starts just before. There's some whisperings of things happening and some little hints and something's going to happen. And then the things start happening and it spirals. And that is what I love so much about apocalyptic stories, movies, books, whatever. I love to see that kind of collapse. So if you're into that, this is perfect. And then in the meantime, our protagonist, Sophie, is the most sheltered person in the world, essentially. Even some of the other characters are shocked at how sheltered she is. And all of a sudden, she's thrust out into the middle of this apocalypse on this quest. And she doesn't even know how to survive in the regular world, let alone this one. So truly, it is almost the ultimate coming of age story because the amount of growth that someone in that position would have to go through or just die, those are essentially the two options. It's insane. And I'm a big fan of how CJ told the story. Sophie is a bit of a complicated, but I think really lovable character. She's really easy to root for throughout it. The main themes overall are obviously there's, a lot about religion, being oppressed by your own religion, particularly women, feminism, finding yourself, growing into womanhood. Some similarities with Maeve Fly there, but this one is very, very heavy on the religious commentary, which should not be surprising if you've even looked at the cover of the book or read the title of it, American Rapture. So those were kind of the main themes throughout. And there were a couple things that I didn't like while I was reading it. It's much easier once I finished it to look back at it incredibly fondly, particularly because I loved the ending. Some people may not. There's always people that aren't going to be happy, I guess. So I shouldn't really even qualify that. But I thought the ending was perfect. Maeve Fly's ending, to me, was the weakest point because it kind of felt like the book just stopped and you almost were missing a chapter. But this ending, it was not rushed. It was not out of nowhere. It made sense. It may not be exactly what you want, but I think it's perfect anyway. Once I got there, looking back, it's very easy for me to be like, oh, I love this book, 5 stars. But during it, there were a couple of points of frustration. At one point particularly, also a few other areas, there were some instances of pretty bold plot armor, essentially moments where characters would just kind of make it through a certain situation just so that the story could continue and it wouldn't be complicated. There were similar things with certain objects kind of appearing in people's possession that, how this person has a cell phone or things like that. Most of these things weren't particularly unrealistic or ridiculous or absurd. It wasn't, somebody fell off a 10-story building and survived, but it was a little bit more somehow Palpatine returned, where there just should have been a bit of an explanation for some of these things. There's one particularly egregious moment that I think anyone would be able to recognize that is exactly what I'm talking about, because there's kind of a massive thing that happens and it's just completely glossed over and no one ever discusses how it happened or anything. It just happened and everything's fine. Let's move on. And I kind of hate to say it, but it just felt a little lazy at times. Frankly, this probably should have had a few more pages put in about how people got out of some of these situations and just a few more details about what was going on in between some of the story points. Another odd thing about it that I wasn't a really big fan of was there was a really strange section where it frankly felt like a dream sequence or something, because what was happening was essentially described as impossible. And it was, about the setting where they were at. The place was constructed in an impossible way. And the descriptions I couldn't even follow. It sounded like an acid trip. And then ultimately it was all just not explained really. It's just how things actually were in the real world. And that made no sense to me. It was never referenced again. Nobody really seemed that weirded out about it. I don't know. Maybe some of this stuff just went over my head or something. Maybe I just am actually making myself sound like an idiot, but I don't know. I came out of that section like, what the fuck was that? So I don't know. I'm probably not doing a great job of selling this right now. I'm just saying there were a couple of things that I think could have been done a little bit better, but the rest of it is so good that I don't care, because those were very short parts of the book. And ultimately, I don't think they really factored into too much later on. You know, if the entire story hinged off of one really fucky point or something, yeah, that would probably bother me more. But ultimately, none of it mattered that much. Most books I read aren't flawless, but to me, that doesn't mean it's not 5 stars because I enjoyed it 5 stars worth. Ultimately, the whole thing about this virus, it just felt painfully possible. And that made it all feel a lot heavier and more disturbing to me. There were a couple of times, especially early on in when stuff started to hit the fan, where I kind of had to just stop and step away and breathe for a minute because some of the stuff is really intense. And do I think there will be feral rape zombies from a pandemic? Probably not. But it's just one of those things where it hits on a lot of the real stuff from the COVID pandemic and kind of how certain groups of people respond to it and how governments are scrambling to respond to it. I mean, a lot of that will be pretty close to home for, I imagine, everyone. So some of this may be a little too close to home for some people, but for me, I mean, I don't know. That's kind of why we're here, isn't it? Reading horrors, to read things that bother us. If it wasn't scary, if it wasn't disturbing to us, then it's just kind of boring, I guess. So all of this said, I had high expectations going in. I loved Maeve Fly. This was a very different book. You know, Maeve Fly, a lot of it was the setting. It's in Hollywood during Halloween. Everything's kind of bright and vivid. This one is in the dull Midwest during the apocalypse. Everything feels gray all the time. It's always storming. Just the overall vibes are very different. The stories are very different. The characters are very different. Frankly, if I read both of them, I would probably never know that they're written by the same person. However, I can firmly say that the two of these together have put CJ Leede in the running for my favorite author. And hot take alert, I think American Rapture is actually the stronger book out of the two. Maeve Fly is, like I said, kind of a bit more fun. I think it's particularly rewarding to, big horror and Halloween fans and stuff like that, because it's just chock full of it. And there's lots of little references to various things. It's just fun. But this one, it's almost a flawless story, I think. And it's just really hard to knock down any points on anything that matters, essentially. It was a fantastic story told in a fantastic way by a fantastic author. And so far, I think this, if it's not it's at least one of my favorite books of the year so far. So we're going into October. This is a perfect Halloween read, very creepy, very fucked up, and it will be available on October 15th. So thank you once again to Tor Nightfire and NetGalley for the advanced copy. And I'm telling you, if this sounds remotely interesting to you at all, I guarantee you will enjoy it. And even if you like shorter books, just read this. I swear, I flew through this book. It was just so captivating. And I think that is truly the one thing that really ties these together and is demonstrated by CJ Leede as an author, is that she is really good at just reeling you in. This absolutely exceeded my expectations. I'm so excited to see what else she does. And be sure to check it out on October 15th when it's available. Links to where you can save it, possibly pre-order it, are in the description. Links to my Maeve Fly episode will be in the description as well. And I will see you next time.